Good evening. Thanks for joining us. This is NTD Business, and I'm Paul Graney. Major American producers say their costs are up, and someone's got to pay for them. And the SEC warns deal makers in the blank check market to follow the rules. It says make sure the target companies are actually ready to go public. That and much more coming up at NTD Business. It's a big day for sports. Major League Baseball is reopening across the country with New York's Yankee Stadium opening at 20% capacity. So what does this mean for the local community? NTD's Phil Zoe has more from the Bronx.
It's going to be busy again, definitely.
You kind of miss it. You grew up with it, so it's like you like the noise, you like the attention, you like the people.
Major League Baseball is back, and especially for local residents around New York's Yankee Stadium, it's good news.
Allowing local stores and people and and businesses to prosper off of this, and slowly getting back to normal. Yeah.
We're Yankees. We survive anywhere. We're just happy to be outside, man. We're just happy to see the Yankees open, the Yankee, playing, the Yankees being with us with the Yankees. We're excited. We're excited for it.
One resident is in the food industry. She says more needs to be done.
More help is needed, but what can you do when everything is to a limit? But they're trying. Like I said, on River Avenue, just behind us, they're building up a lot of outdoor dining areas. So hopefully it helps, instead of, turning away people because it's overcapacity.
She hopes local businesses that had to close down during the pandemic, like the local draft house, have the chance to come back.
Last year, they was actually giving away free meals, but then they had stopped, closed down the restaurant because business was slow. But now everybody's building back up, so hopefully they'll get a chance because they was actually giving back to the community, and unfortunately they had to shut down.
All teams are expected to resume a regular season, playing 162 games. Phil Zoe, NTD News.
The maker of Kleenex tissues and Huggies diapers, Kimberly-Clark, says it's facing higher raw material costs, so your toilet paper, tissues, and diapers will be more expensive this summer. The company says it has to raise prices on many of its products in the United States and Canada to offset rising commodity costs. The company makes several wood pulp-based products, including Cottonelle cotton, toilet paper, and Kleenex tissues. Higher prices obviously make it more expensive to manufacture the product, and often the consumer will pay for it. So Kimberly-Clark will likely raise its prices between 5 and 9%, and you can expect those higher prices starting in late June. J.M. Smucker already raised prices for its peanut butter. General Mills, which makes Cheerios, and Haagen-Dazs, is planning to hike prices too. Supply chain disruptions could be partly to blame for the higher costs. But higher costs caused by inflation of the money supply is something we've been talking about all year. The Federal Reserve and the government have been printing money at unprecedented rates since the pandemic began. Printing dollars devalues the dollars already in circulation, so you'll need more of them to buy the things you want. You get less bang for your buck, literally. Peter Schiff, chairman over at Schiff Gold's been warning about it too. Asked him if this is how inflation takes hold. First, the cost of raw materials rise, and then the prices of consumer products are forced up.
Yeah, well, certainly the price increases move through the chain, and the consumer is at the end. So the producer is seeing the price increases first, and then they have to decide how much of this do we want to pass on, how much do we want to absorb. I mean, maybe if they think initially that it's a fluke, that the price increases will reverse, they may resist the need to raise their own prices because maybe they think their competitors won't. But once they realize that it's not temporary, that price increases are going to continue, then I think they're going to rush to try to recoup these costs from the ultimate consumer by raising their prices. And everybody's going to be doing it. So you're not going to be at a competitive disadvantage. I mean, the people who don't raise their prices won't be able to stay in business.
And why is it that it goes to these commodities first? Is it because we have the liquidity from the Fed goes to, is it speculators? And then they put the money into futures, into lumber, et cetera, or how does it work?
Yeah, well, those commodities are probably going to be the first to respond. I mean, they're lower down. I mean, a lot of those commodities are simply inputs into other products. And so, you're kind of moving up the pyramid. So let's say the price of sugar goes up. Okay, well, then the price of things that need sugar as an ingredient might go up, right? So, and then of course, the transportation costs go up because now energy costs go up. So it's more expensive to transport the finished product to wherever the consumer is ultimately going to buy it. So all these things build on themselves. And there's going to be a lot of momentum here. And the problem for the Fed is the Fed's already said that they're going to wait. They're not going to react preemptively. They're going to wait maybe a year or more to make sure that the price increases aren't transitory before they do anything to contain it. The problem is they're going to wait so long, by the time they recognize their mistake, inflation could be 4%, 5%, 6%, and the Fed will still have interest rates at zero. So how do you contain inflation when you're so far behind the curve? You can't. But I actually think it's more insidious than that. I think the Fed has to bluff that it's going to fight inflation in the future, even though it knows it can't do it. The reason the Fed doesn't want to do anything about inflation is because it can't. Because if it tried to do something about inflation, it would have to raise rates and shrink its balance sheet, which is the only thing that's propping up the economy right now. It's the only thing keeping the stock market up. It's the only thing that's enabling the government to do all this stimulus spending. So if the Fed actually reacted to the inflation threat, it would have to collapse the whole bubble economy that it has been nurturing all these years, and the government would have to cancel all the stimulus plans. They would actually have to start cutting spending because they wouldn't have any money to spend.
Don't know if that'll happen. And what about, what is the time lag? What are we looking at before the consumers really start to feel it? A year, 18 months, 2 years?
Well, I think they're feeling it right now. It's just that people think that it's just a temporary pain that's going to go away, you know, once the supply chains are no longer bottled up and things get back to normal. But that's not going to happen. People are going to be surprised that not only do these price increases continue, but they are going to accelerate. So they're going to be moving up even faster in the future than they are right now.
Very good. Peter Schiff, appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure thing.
Schiff mentioned the Fed's easy money policies are keeping the stock market up. Now the SEC is warning Wall Street about the risks involved with blank check companies, or SPACs. SPACs are an unconventional way to take a company public, with investors putting money into the investment vehicle before they even know which company they're going to own. A shell company is first listed on the exchange, then it acquires a real company, and voila, you're public. Obviously high risk, with many saying the low interest rate, easy money environment are encouraging these types of risks. Now the SEC's chief accountant encouraged stakeholders to carefully consider whether target companies are actually ready to go public, because they may still be in the early stages of development. Investors have already sued 8 companies that combined with SPACs in the first quarter of this year. They allege the SPACs and their sponsors hid the company's weaknesses before the acquisitions. One example is the SPAC Diamond Peak Holdings Corp. It merged with a car company, Lordstown Motors Group Corp. Plaintiffs say the companies hid the fact that Lordstown's flagship vehicle burst into flames within 10 minutes of its first test run. You can see why that's important to know. At Wall Street today, stocks rallied. S&P 500 crossed the $4,000 mark for the first time. The Dow rose 172 points, 0.52%. S&P 500 gained 47 points, or 1.18%. The Nasdaq climbed 233 points, or 1.76%. Those big tech stocks like Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, Nvidia all jumped 2% or more today. Micron jumped nearly 5% after beating revenue estimates. The CBOE Volatility Index slipped a little bit today, below 18 points for the first time in 14 months. It's a level not seen since last March 2020. Treasury yields slipped a little as well. Gold up nearly 1%, and oil, Brent and WTI both up as well, between 2 and 3%. Johnson & Johnson might have to throw away as much as 15 million doses of its vaccine. A little-known company is now at the center of some big quality control problems there. Johnson & Johnson said Wednesday a batch of vaccine made by a company called Emergent can't be used because it didn't meet quality standards. Workers reportedly mixed up the ingredients with another vaccine from AstraZeneca. Emergent is a contract manufacturer for J&J and was key to the drug maker's plan to deliver 100 million doses of the vaccine by the end of May. But as the Associated Press reported, the FDA has repeatedly cited Emergent for problems like poorly trained employees, cracked vials, and problems with managing contamination around its facilities. It's unclear whether the problem will affect future deliveries of J&J's vaccine. The company says it's still planning to deliver those 100 million doses by the end of June. We reached out to both Johnson & Johnson and Emergent. Johnson & Johnson says the problem was identified in time and the batch never advanced to the finishing stages of the manufacturing process. The company also says they addressed the problem with Emergent and shared information with the FDA. Emergent, though, didn't immediately respond for comment. With the $1.9 trillion virus relief bill, American companies and local governments have more power to buy medical supplies. But what Congressman Stephen Lynch is telling them to make sure to buy American. NTD's Allison Lee reports.
This is a gap in our national security that we can address ourselves, rather than offshoring that capability to countries that are hacking our federal government, hacking our domestic companies, and who are not acting in a friendly and supportive way.
Democrat Congressman Stephen Lynch from Massachusetts is urging companies and local governments receiving funds from the American Rescue Plan to buy American medical supplies. But some companies still offshore their supplies.
So even though some companies may be assembling the product, the mask, they may be putting the elastics on here in the United States, and they call them assembled in the United States but sourced overseas, that doesn't eliminate the vulnerability that we have.
In April last year, Massachusetts negotiated a deal with the Chinese regime and bought over 1 million respiratory masks from China. But many of them are not the industry standard N95 masks. Rather, they are a Chinese version called KN95. Some hospitals in Boston have declined to use them, and they are not certified by the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health.
We have companies all over the United States that are trying to provide the product for the protection of United States citizens. That can't happen if we continue to buy product from China. Okay, so we have to get our act together. We have some.
Lynch told the Boston Herald that if we have to rely on our adversity to protect us, we're in trouble, and that we shouldn't put our future and our safety in the hands of a government that's been hostile to the interests of the United States. Allison Lee, NTD News.
We reached out to the Massachusetts governor for a response, but didn't get a reply before airtime. Seemingly to appease China, American company Boeing is urging the United States to keep human rights separate from trade relations with Beijing. Its CEO says it can't afford to be locked out of China. NTD's Patrick Hayden reports.
Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun is urging the US to separate its human rights disputes with China with its trade relations. He says Boeing should be left out of bilateral disputes and warned it could be locked out of the China market. He told the US Chamber of Commerce Aviation Summit Wednesday, "I think politically China is more difficult, but we still have to trade with our biggest partner in the world, China." Boeing and its European rival Airbus each sell about a quarter of their jetliners to China, which is now the world's largest domestic travel market. China has expressed concerns about Boeing's 737 MAX, which was grounded for nearly 2 years after 2 fatal crashes. It was approved to fly again in November, but China has said it will take a step-by-step approach to approving the jet. Western sources say concerns are growing that Beijing could be leveraging the approval process in a diplomatic standoff with Washington. Calhoun said Boeing cannot afford to be locked out of the Chinese market. He said its competitor Airbus will jump right in. And this week, the US Trade Representative's office highlighted international trade barriers it faced worldwide. It highlighted China as the leading offender that causes harm to American companies and farmers. Beijing faces tension with the West over its treatment of Uyghurs in Xinjiang, where more than 1 million people are held in internment camps. China rejects the allegation and has warned foreign companies not to step into politics. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
The world's biggest chip makers are spending big to tackle a global shortage of semiconductors. Just days after US giant Intel announced a $20 billion investment, Taiwan's TSMC announces an even bigger plan. It's investing $100 billion over 3 years to boost outputs at its plants. The firm is the world's largest contract chip maker, supplying brands like Apple. Its new investment comes as firms around the world reel from a lack of silicon. Pandemic disruption, strong demand for consumer electronics, and the US-China trade tension are among the factors behind the shortage. It's forced car makers to cut output and is now biting makers of phones, laptops, even home appliances like fridges. TSMC says now is a good time to invest. Besides the current shortage, it says factors like the shift to 5G phone networks should ensure that demand stays strong. TSMC shares rose about 2.5% on Thursday following the news. And still to come. If you want to travel this summer, you better hurry with booking your trip. Some destinations are selling out fast. And we see 12 bottles of Bordeaux wine return from a trip to outer space. Early tastings reveal key differences from their earthly counterparts. That and more after the break.
Here's what a reader writes to best-selling author James Cook about his new book, The Great Gold Comeback, Bankruptcy of the Welfare State. There is no way I could ever properly express my thanks to you for the Gold Comeback book and all that you have written within it. What a real treasure. Get this hard-hitting volume absolutely free. It covers economics, inflation, socialism, welfarism, capitalism, crashes, panics, interventionism, and crisis. Regularly $29. Yours free. Call 1-800-328-1860.
It's just clear as day. The media, whether it's broadcast, cable, or print media, has become extremely biased. And I started looking online for alternative ways to get information. And I saw an ad for a free trial. And I looked at it and I said, Epoch Times. I mean, come on, this is end of days type of stuff. I mean, what are they going to be talking about here? And I said, well, it's a free trial. Let me dig in. Is it giving me both sides? Is it giving me an objective point of view here? I have looked for opportunities to see where they might be biased, and I don't find it. It has given me a level of trust in media that I didn't think I'd ever get back. I love the Epoch Times because it has renewed my faith in the idea that a reliable, responsible, non-biased source of information is available. And I can say that I love it because of that.
Spring break may have helped March become the busiest month for air travel since the pandemic began. New data from the Transportation Security Administration shows the agency screened more than 38 million people last month. TSA saw more than 1 million travelers for the 26 days in March. As spring break continues for students across the nation, though, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention still recommending people not travel. Spoil sports. And if you are planning a vacation for the summer, you might want to book your trip soon. Some places are already completely full. NTD's Evelyn Lee reports.
This summer travel season, people are looking to break free from home, and some parts of the travel industry are already booming. The CEO of App in the Air, Bayram Anikov, says it's mostly for two reasons. One of them is accelerated vaccinations.
But the second thing is obviously the spring break and some stimulation from the government.
Data from Adara shows domestic flights in the U.S. surged this month, but demand has not reached its upper limit yet. All the more reason to book now, according to Anikov.
The number of seats taken by passengers or paying passengers on the aircraft, right now they're about 50 to 60%, while in 2019 it was like 85%.
Which means that airlines are still trying to attract passengers to fill up their seats and cover the operational costs.
But will it go up? Yes, for sure. When? I think by the time the capacities will be on about pre-COVID rates.
And it's mostly leisure travel that's driving the growth. The most popular destinations are still similar to those before pandemic times.
Domestically, Florida for sure, LA and Vegas.
But according to CNBC, more outdoor destinations are becoming popular, and hotels are filling up fast. Greg Henderson, co-owner of the Roxbury at Stratton Falls, has similar advice. He says now is the time to book hotels. Demand is so high at the Roxbury that by mid-April, there won't be any weekend availability left until October. While Club Wyndham told CNBC that 3 of its resorts in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, are nearly fully booked in July. Anikov expects that the travel industry will recover soon.
Assuming the vaccinations rate and the herd immunity projections, I think that we will get to 75% for sure by the end of the summer, compared to for domestic travel compared to 2019.
He says while it might not be back to normal quite yet, he's confident it's getting there domestically. Evelyn Lee, NTD News.
As cherry blossoms reach their peak, restaurants in Washington, D.C. are celebrating with delicious seasonal treats. Let's take a look.
Most of the National Cherry Blossom Festival is going virtual this year, but some annual traditions are marching on. For years, local restaurants have celebrated the cherry blossoms with yummy seasonal fare.
We've had the design for the last 6 years, and it's worked, and we don't want to mess with it. And it's timeless, so it seems to work every year, and spring is in there, and they come out.
Filled with tart cherry jam and topped with a cream cheese glaze, this bestseller gives people the experience of cherry blossoms without having to step outside. But one regular told NTD he's going to enjoy the festive treat under flowering trees with friends.
I'm definitely going to take them to the donut shop so they can get, eat a donut that has a cherry blossom on it, and also go and see the cherry blossoms over by the Jefferson and MLK memorials.
DC's iconic cherry blossoms reached their peak last Sunday, but might remain until early next week if nice weather persists. People from all over the world can join in with nationalmall.org's virtual bloom cam. Lin, NTD News, Washington, D.C.
A special wine tasting in France features a taste out of this world. 12 bottles of Bordeaux that spent a year in space have returned to Earth, tasting, smelling, looking kind of different than bottles that stayed on the ground. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the story.
Station Houston on 2.
The Institute for Wine and Vine Research in Bordeaux is hosting a wine tasting like no other, and it's all thanks to the SpaceX Dragon cargo capsule. The spacecraft undocked from the International Space Station in January and headed back to Earth with some precious cargo. It was carrying 12 bottles of Bordeaux wine and 320 snippets of Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon grapevines. They had been sent into space a year earlier to determine how they would develop outside the Earth's atmosphere.
The main reason going to space was, in fact, to see how the aging process is working and how we can influence the aging process.
Now it's time to taste it. 12 lucky wine connoisseurs are blind tasting one of the space-traveled bottles, alongside a bottle from the same vintage that had stayed on Earth. The Celestial Vino goes for about $6,000 a bottle. But can the experts spot the difference between Earth wine and space wine? Jane Anson, wine expert and writer for The Decanter, says she can.
So both were absolutely gorgeous, but again, following the colour, the one that had remained on Earth for me was still a little bit more closed, a bit more tannic, a bit younger, and the one that had been up into space, the tannins had softened, the more floral aromatics came out.
Preliminary results from the tasting released on Wednesday showed differences in color, taste, and aroma between the space wine and the Earth wine. Understanding how gravity and oxygen affect the aging process could allow producers to age fine wines more quickly. The vine snippets not only all survived the journey, but also grew faster than vines on Earth, despite limited light and water. Understanding how plants develop outside of Earth's atmosphere could pave the way for vine growing and winemaking in space. But it also has the potential to improve agricultural practices on Earth. Scientists will be analyzing the wine and vines in more detail over the next few months. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
That's the latest business updates for today. You can still catch NTD Evening News with Stephanie Cox at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. For NTD Business, it's all for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Don't miss out on important news. Our videos are being deleted. So if you don't want to be cut off from honest news, take a moment to sign up for our newsletter at newsletter.ntd.com so you don't lose access to NTD. Go to newsletter.ntd.com to sign up for our evening newsletter.